I have come to set fire to the earth, and how I wish it were already blazing. Jesus says some pretty surprising things in our gospel this weekend. His words about setting the world ablaze, of bringing about division. I've come to bring division, he says, to set the earth on fire. Sounds rather strange. Surprised that Jesus would say that. And it's not that he's saying something that the world is going to be set on fire because we haven't got enough rain or there's some kind of, climate stuff, catastrophe that's going to happen. Nor is his words the basis of a certain movie quote and meme where some men just want to watch the world burn. It's not the basis of that. Jesus, in saying this, he does in a sense want our world to burn, but not in a destructive way. He is expressing his overwhelming desire of his love for us. He wants our hearts to burn with the same fire of love that he has for us. It's a kind of love that Jesus loves with. It's a love that is willing to make sacrifices. It's a love that's so much stronger than any kind of destructive force in our world today. I have come to set the earth on fire, he says, expressing that burning passion that he has for us, a passion that literally leads to his passion, his death, his resurrection for our salvation. It's a kind of love that perhaps is sometimes lacking within us. We can sometimes fall into complacency, inaction. We go through the motions of the things that we have to do each day, sometimes with little energy or little excitement. Mass can feel boring, but in reality, Mass is not boring. We're the ones who are boring when Mass feels boring. Fire within our hearts that he wants to fill. But sometimes we're barely lit. But our parishes are meant to be on fire. A fire that goes forth and brings Jesus' love to the whole world. And so we need a continual rekindling of that love within our own hearts. And those who are most on fire were the saints. Today's second reading says that we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. There have lived among us in the past, and I dare say that they're still living among us today. Those individuals whose hearts have been set on fire by his love. We can be tempted to think that becoming a saint is an exception, that there's no way that I could be a saint. But that's not true. Jesus is calling every single one of you to be a saint. He is calling all of you to that greatness. And I want to draw our attention to one of these witnesses, one of these saints, the patroness of our parish here in Randolph, St. Jane Frances de Chantal. Her feast day was yesterday. Jane was a happily married wife and a mother who, along with her husband, who was the Baron of Chantal, ran a large estate. She and her husband, Christopher, they had 6 children, though, unfortunately, 3 of their children died as infants. And so we can see, not only at this moment, but at different moments in Jane's life, that sanctity means that we don't grow in holiness because everything's always perfect, but rather we grow in holiness even in the midst of life's joys and even tragedies. And though she lost half of her children, Jane maintained a great trust in God. For example, she restored the practice of daily Mass there at their estate and was very much engaged in doing various charitable works, even as she was a wife and mother. When her older sister died, Jane also cared for her sister's 3 children, as well as her own. And so her vocation as a wife and a mother was taken very seriously by her. And it will really be a part of her growth in holiness. After only 9 years of her marriage to her husband Christopher, he was killed suddenly in a hunting accident, which left Jane as a widow when she was only 28 years old. You can see an image of Jane at her husband's deathbed up in the side here in the sanctuary. It was at this time, after her husband died, when she made a vow of chastity to not marry again, but dedicate her life more and more to the Lord. She moved with her family to live with her father-in-law, not really because they wanted to, but because he wasn't a very good man, and he threatened to cut their family off entirely from any inheritance if she didn't come. And so it was a time of real trial for her, yet she patiently endured her father-in-law's ill will toward her, and even helped to raise his 4 illegitimate children. During this time, too, she was able to forgive the man who had killed her husband, and she even became a godmother to that man's child. And again, these moments show us that saints are formed no matter what our life, what our family situation brings us. During this time, too, Jane began to pray to God, asking for a spiritual guide for her life. And her life changed forever when she met St. Francis de Sales. And they began a time of writing letters to one another. You can see Jane with St. Francis in the window up there. She's kneeling before him. Jane expressed how she longed to escape to cloistered life of a nun, to serve God more. But St. Francis guided her to delay. She needed to complete the care of her children first. And this can bring us some good reflections, especially since the school year is about to begin again. And this is a good moment for all parents and families to reflect upon. Parents, your first vocation is to one another and to your children. The church recognizes, parents, that you have the right as the primary teachers of your children. The church will always defend that. But we also point out to you that means you have a great responsibility. It's a promise that you made to God when your children were baptized. At their baptism, you were asked, you've come to have your child baptized. In doing so, you're accepting the responsibility of training him or her in the faith. And it will be your duty to bring them up to keep God's commandments that Christ taught us by loving God and our neighbor. Do you clearly understand what you are undertaking? And at that time, you said, we do. And so God holds you to that commitment. It's not something that can be given to someone else. And certainly the time seems to have begun where we could rely upon the world around us, the environment that we're living in, to teach our children those values. But now, we can't as much. If parents, you don't teach your children your values, the world is quite ready to teach them theirs. And as a church, we of course want to assist you in being able to form your children as Jesus' disciples throughout the school year and during the summer months, of course, as well, through our various programs, religious education, Catholic schools. But we know we cannot replace you in your primary responsibility to them. And it will be precisely through your teaching your children the faith that you yourselves will grow in holiness. And that's why it was only after that time when Jane Francis, having provided for the growth and education of her children, was then able to follow God's call for her to form a new religious order called the Congregation of Visitation, She founded it with St. Francis de Sales. And these visitation sisters were for women and girls whose health, age, or other circumstances didn't allow them to be part of the congregations that were already established at that time. And these visitation sisters weren't cloistered, weren't away from the world in their convent, but instead they went out. They went out to do various good deeds, to serve those in need. It was based upon the act of Mary, who went to visit her cousin Elizabeth in her time of need. So we can see, as well as in the painting of her life, you can see Jane as a sister going and serving the poor, bringing them bread. Through her assistance, there were formed 86 convents of these visitation sisters by the time that Jane died 31 years later. And we can ask, where did St. Jane Frances de Chantal get that kind of zeal to persevere, even though her life was far from perfect, that she went through many moments of tragedy and suffering? Where did the entire cloud of the witnesses of saints, where did they get that kind of energy, those who've gone before us? Well, it comes from only one source, God himself. Our hearts can only be set on fire when this fire spreads to us from the very heart of Jesus himself. And really, that was one of St. Jane's favorite devotions, was to that of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Heart of Mary. And I myself didn't really grow up with the Sacred Heart devotion, but it's become a larger part of my life since becoming a priest. And this year, I'm going to be giving an ongoing catechesis on Jesus' Sacred Heart on First Fridays, especially with the school masses that we're going to have on First Fridays. So I invite you to join us for those masses too, to learn more about that devotion. Of course, that's only one way to come in contact with Jesus' burning love for us. So I invite you to seek out other ways, because Jesus, in his burning heart of love, is seeking out you. He desires to set the whole earth, our parishes, our communities, and every single one of your hearts on fire with his love.